Welcome to The Next Level, conversations that propel business. The next hour is all about the entrepreneur, why they start businesses, how they make their businesses grow, how they overcome failures and achieve success. Your host, Bob Gibbons, founder of Riata Commercial Realty, a commercial real estate advisory and tenant advocacy firm. Bob will ask probing questions to find impactful solutions that will help take your business to the next level. And now, here's Bob Gibbons.
How do you go back to working for a big company after building your own companies? And how do you how do you scratch your own entrepreneurial itch within the confines of a giant company? Our guest today is Yoram Solomon, back for part 2 of our interview. So after serving in the Israeli Armed Forces and having a business fail, Yoram moved his family to the U.S. to run a company in Silicon Valley, which he later sold successfully. But then he stayed on with the acquiring company. And he later worked with Texas Instruments and Interface Corporation, and he's credited with being one of the creators of Wi-Fi and USB, and he holds 22 patents. But then what do you do after you leave the corporate world? So 9 lives of Yoram is, I guess, what we ought to be calling this. Yoram's also written 8 books, written over 200 articles for Inc. magazine, Innovate Excellence, and Dallas Innovates. He's one of the founders of the North Texas Angel Network, a professor at SMU, a professional speaker, a TEDx presenter, and he's founded the Innovation Culture Institute. So you can learn a whole lot more about him at innovationcultureinstitute.com. Welcome back, Yoram.
Thank you. Thank you for having me twice.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So for our listeners, we are doing this as a 2-parter. So there was just too much in Yoram's life to deal with in an hour. So we asked him to come back and do a second show with us. So this is part 2. If you haven't listened to part 1, please stop your podcast, stop your YouTube, and go find part 1 first. It aired last week. And so, Yoram, I think in our last conversation, we'd gotten to the point where your company that you had joined in Silicon Valley had sold to a larger company, and you became a VP director or something with that company, and you stayed on with them for a while. So answer my first question. How do you go from being an entrepreneur and starting your own company, being a partner in another company, and then selling that and being part of this giant company that you're just a small part of?
Well, first of all, the first time it just happened. I mean, once you sell your company or a company you're a partner with to a larger company and they keep you, then you become part of a larger company. The interesting thing was PCTEL, which was the largest company at that time. That was I believe they were valued, give or take, about $2.2 billion. And they had just went public. So even through their IPO, they had to disclose the fact that they're negotiating an acquisition of Voyager, which was our company. And then, as I said last time, all of a sudden I find myself essentially initially without a job. But then they realized, they didn't realize, they just shared with me that, we want you to become the director of product marketing for the entire company. At that time, I went through an interview process with all the VPs. And I think one of the funniest things about that interview process was that if any of them, if they all sat in the room in the same time and were asked to describe the person they interviewed, I bet that in 10 minutes they're going to go, we don't think we interviewed the same person. Now, does that mean that I lied to them? No, it didn't. It doesn't, because I didn't. The thing is, and this brings me to one of the things I'm working on today, one of the most powerful traits that you can have or qualities that you can have is the ability to empathize with somebody else. And so that to me was really empathy. So I'm sitting there with the CTO, with the Chief Technology Officer, and he's interviewing me. He does not want to hear about processes. He does not want to hear about marketing. He does not want to hear about business development. He wants to hear about technology. So I sat with him and we talked about technology and all kinds of, my patents are obviously related to technology. And I started my career as an engineer. So there was a lot to talk to him about. Then I sat with the VP of engineering, and with him, I spoke more about processes and how you get teams to work together and be effective, and how do you pass things across over the fence, if you will, from one team to another. How do you define projects and so on? Sat down with the VP of human resources and talked about the process of innovation and so on. So everyone I sat down with, I knew what they cared about the most and talk to them about that.
Yeah, meet them where they are.
Because for the most part, they asked one or two questions and then left it open to me to come in with whatever I had to share. So I did that. I did leave that company in early 2002, and I joined Texas Instruments. When I joined Texas Instruments, the group that I joined was really a startup up until 2000. Elantro was a startup in the group. The part that I joined of Elantro was up in Santa Rosa. They also had a facility in San Diego in North Carolina. And so I joined the group I joined a group that was a startup, so still kind of maintained the feeling of a startup, the sense of a startup. It was in North California and pretty far from Dallas, and so you could keep your own personality over there.
Do they let a subsidiary like that kind of operate like a startup and kind of run autonomously?
In some parts they did, in others they didn't. So there was a combination of things there. In my area, and I was responsible there for along with a friend of mine who was my first boss over there in Texas Instruments, Bill Carney. We were responsible for representing Texas Instruments in industry organizations, and that's how I got to the board of the Wi-Fi Alliance and some of the other organizations. But the transition for me, the transition from startup to corporate America within Texas Instruments happened when I moved from Silicon Valley or from North California over here to Dallas. Because, and I think I told you that story before, that when I got the offer from Texas Instruments, my wife asked if we were going to have to move to Dallas. And I said, no, we're not going to move to Dallas. She said, what if they offered you to be a general manager? I told her, I don't see why anybody would offer that. 1 year, 5 months later, I get an offer to move here to Dallas and be the general manager of what was, at that time, an $80 million business. After about a year, it became close to a $100 million business. And but the interesting part was most of the people, or I would say probably most of the people who I was interviewing with knew me, but we had the person who ended up being my boss. She didn't know me, so we interviewed several times, once in California, once back in Texas. The second one was her boss. He was a senior VP. And his name is C.S. Lee. And everybody was afraid of him. I mean, he was brutal. He was very straight to the point. And I remember that she said she wanted him to interview me as well. So I had to come in. And I walked into his office. He held my resume in his hands. And he said, I have one question for you. When I look at your resume, I see a lot of startup. This is Texas Instruments. We're not a startup. Things don't go as fast as you're used to. How will you deal with that? And I thought, man, that's an interesting question. And I thought about it for a while. And, one thought that I had in mind was a friend of mine who had sold a company to Texas Instruments about 2 years earlier, actually 1999. He sold a company, and he stayed for about, I think, 2 or 3 years. He did not even stay through his entire stock being vested. He was so frustrated. After a while, my guess is that he made $5-10 million off of it. So it's not like he left with nothing. But he could not even stay throughout the entire term until all of his stock gets vested, the stock that he got through the acquisition, and he left. So I told C.S. Lee, the way I see it, there are three things you can do about it. One is you can just roll with it. And you go, you know what? I'm being paid. I get my salary. I just stay here. I come in. I go home. I don't have to worry about anything. I'll do things at the speed of the company. A second option is do what my other friend did, and that is I just get frustrated. Things don't move as fast. I just leave. I would take the third option. And he goes, what's the third option? And I said, do something about it. You don't have to accept the fact that that's how large corporation behaves. And that's essentially what I did. Now, that entire group moved within a week to under another senior VP. And that's where the story of USB 3 that I told you last time took place. And that was a perfect example of how you do something about it. And that leads to the title again of my 7th book, Culture Starts With You, Not Your Boss. So, for me, it wasn't that now I'm in a company with 35,000 employees. I'm still me, and I'm an entrepreneur in nature, and I'm not going to let the large company mentality affect me in any way. I'm going to do something about it.
So is there a big difference between being an entrepreneur and being an intrapreneur, trying to, affect change within an organization or start something new within a bigger organization?
Yes, the first E is replaced with an I, and then the A is replaced with an E.
Back to not growing up.
Yeah, I told you I haven't grown up, and I don't expect to. But, obviously there is a lot of bureaucracy that you're going to deal with in the larger company. On one hand, on the other hand, you will have more resources than you would have in the smaller company. So there are differences there, but I really think that both words, entrepreneur and intrapreneur, are similar because really what they boil down to is the definition. Once I was asked when I actually this was how my campaign for school board started, presenting or speaking in a STEM summit. I was asked, what do you mean by entrepreneurs? Because I told them we need more entrepreneurs. And they said, they asked me, what do you mean by entrepreneur? And I said, an entrepreneur is somebody that gets up in the morning, sees the opportunities, sees the risks, makes a plan, and executes on that plan without having someone tell them what to do every day. And you can do that in your own startup. You can do that in your own one-person business, and you can do that with a company with 35,000 employees. It's a discipline.
Well, I like your idea on that because it is ultimately about seeing something that needs to be done and finding a way to get that done. And you have to rally the resources available, whether they're inside the company or outside the company. Whatever it is, you still have to go through a lot of those same steps. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back. So we were just talking about being an entrepreneur versus an entrepreneur. So how long were you at Texas Instruments?
I was there for, let's see, if I started in 2002, moved here in 2003, I left them in 2008
to
join Interphase.
So 5-6 years. And why the change?
Well, it was interesting. I got a call from a recruiter, and the recruiter he said, there's this company that's looking for a vice president of corporate strategy. And I looked at their website while I still have him on the phone, and as I see their websites, it was just boring. I mean, I couldn't find anything that was interesting. It was a company that's dealing with boards that go into the telecom infrastructure. I like boards, by the way, more than semiconductors. I like products that you can touch, but those were boring products. And so I told the recruiter, I don't think so. It doesn't seem very interesting, and I think I'll pass. And I switched to the other page, the executive team. I looked at the executive team, don't know anybody there, don't have anything in common with them. Sometimes you look and you find someone that you know, and that's great. Didn't find anyone that I knew. And I went to the last page, the About Us page, and that's where it grabbed me. The address. It was in zip code 75093. It's my home zip code.
Where you live.
Where I live. And, I told you when I started working for Texas Instruments up in Santa Rosa, my house was down in Sunnyvale.
Yeah.
It was an hour and 40 minutes up, 2 hours down. So talk about commute. All of a sudden, here's a company that's 4 minutes from my house. And, kind of a sidestep. when people ask me, when I told them that I'm now working for a company that's 4 minutes from my house, they said, "Oh, do you go home for lunch?" And I used to say, "Heck, I go home if there's somebody in the restroom." And so it was, they were in my home zip code, and I thought to myself, you know what? For that, I have to at least meet the CEO and chat with him and see what is it that they're looking for. And I had that meeting, and I'll tell you a side story that might be interesting, but I'll get there. So I'm meeting the CEO. We're meeting for lunch, and I told him, "Look, I looked at your website. I'm not overly excited with what I see there." And he said, "You know what?" I was pretty direct, and this was
nothing to lose.
I had nothing to lose, and he said, "I feel the same." Okay, so what do you need from a vice president of strategy? I'll stop this story. I want to tell you another story to come back to that same point. So one day there's somebody, after I started working at Interface, there's somebody who came over, and somebody I knew from TI, and he wanted to talk to me. So we scheduled to meet 9 a.m. at Starbucks. So it's 9 a.m. I'm waiting. He's not there yet. 9:05, 9:10, 9:15. I'm ready to leave. And my assistant called me, and she said, "There's somebody here at the office waiting for you." And so I asked her to put him on the line, and it was him. And I said, "What are you doing there?" We said, "Starbucks." And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm coming over." I said, Don't worry, I'll come back." So I came back. Now it's 9:20. We walk to my office. We sit down. I told him, "I just have to warn you about one thing, and that is at 10 a.m., I'm turning into a pumpkin because I do have another meeting, then I'm not going to be late to that meeting." That's fine. So he starts telling me about everything he's been doing for the last, ever since he left TI or I left TI. And at some point, it was 9:40, and I said, "Look, here's the deal. We wasted the first 20 minutes by you going to the wrong place. We wasted the next 20 minutes by you telling me all kinds of stories. I still don't know what is it that you need. Let me ask you something. We got 20 minutes left. I will turn into a pumpkin at 10 a.m. What can we do in the next 20 minutes that would bring value, not to me, but to you?" He goes, "I'm looking for a career change." "You're looking for a job." Okay, so don't you love it when people are in transition? They're looking for, I'm looking for a job. Just say it. So he's looking for a job. I said, "What do you do?" He said, "Well, I do strategy, marketing, business development, and corporate development." I said, "Okay, great. Define strategy." Man could not define strategy to save his life. Okay, you said marketing. What kind of marketing? What are we talking about? Product marketing, marketing communications. There are different types of marketing. What kind of marketing are you talking about? You said, "Well, it's when you identify customers for your products and you go and push your products to those customers." I said, "That's sales." Okay, by the way, in TI, he worked in sales. Third, you said business development. Define business development for me. So, well, that's when, you grow your business by finding customers and selling your products to the customers. So that's sales. And you said corporate development. What do you do in corporate development? "Oh, mergers and acquisitions. That's what I've been doing in the last year." So, well, the fact that Texas Instruments Corporate Development Group focuses on mergers and acquisition doesn't mean that this is the only thing that a corporate development group does. I said, "Look, we got 5 minutes left. I really have to go in 5 minutes. I'm going to give you a piece of advice. And that piece of advice, even if it's going to be hard to listen to, will give you value in the next 5 minutes. Here it is. When I asked you what you do, you gave me 4 things. You were trying to be very, very broad. You were trying to cast a very wide net so that no matter what I have, whatever position I have, somehow we can fit it into what you've been doing. This is how you define yourself as a commodity. If there's one piece of advice that I can offer you, it's do not define yourself as a commodity. Define yourself as something very, very, very unique. And that, yes, it's going to be harder to find a job that requires exactly what you have, but I need you to be an expert. I need you to be the best in that one thing.
Absolutely. I mean, and the other thing I'll interrupt real quick is that the problem is that whenever you're so general, nobody knows where to put you because you're too general, but they need something specific. But the reverse is true as well. If you're very specific, maybe they don't have exactly that, but they have this other thing that's a little bit off of that, but you might still work for. And so they'll tell you about that other thing, and then you have that opportunity. So by being more specific, you might end up with an opportunity or two, but by being a generalist, you don't end up with anything.
That's right. And so I said, you got to be highly differentiated. You have to be very unique. You have to pursue one area and just drop everything else and be the best you can in this area. And when you find a company that is what they're looking for, this is what they need, in order to get the job, all you have to do is just show up to the interview. So he asked me, so what is it for you? And I said, to me, I'm right now the VP of strategy and I do this and I do that. But the one thing is I can find the next big thing for a company. This is it. That's what I do. I can find the next big thing for a company. Let me go back to the previous story. I'm sitting there with the CEO, and the CEO, I just told him that this company is boring, essentially, and he says he agrees with me. And I asked him, what is it that you need in a VP of strategy? And he said, I need you to find the next big thing for our company.
Oh, perfect.
That was it. I had the job by showing up to the interview. The next interview was with the rest of the management team, the executive team. The following interview was with the board of directors, but the job was mine when I showed up to the interview because what they were looking for was exactly what I differentiated myself.
Did he know that before he came to the meeting?
No, I don't think so. He didn't know me. All he knew was the recruiter sent him my background, and I don't even think that my resume was that specific at that point.
So you obviously joined them.
I did.
And what was the next big thing?
The next big thing was a product called PenView, and that many of my patents, I think that more than half of my patents are on a product called PenView. It's an educational technology product that did change the direction of that company. Interesting.
So what exactly does that do?
PenView is a product that supplements TV displays, projectors, and everything, and allows you to interact with the content. So you can point at content, you can write on it, and so on. It's pretty cool.
And was that the kind of area where they were before, educational technology?
It was completely different than what they were in before, because before that they were in telecom infrastructure, and that took them into the direction of education technology.
Well, I mean, that's a huge change. I mean, that changes not only, I mean, obviously they're a technology company, so they can figure out the technology, but the entire delivery system, the customer acquisition, everything changes.
And it went back to this offsite session that I had with the company back in 2009. It was in August of 2009. I took the top executive team with the CEO. We went to Rough Creek Lodge. And for 3 days, I facilitated what is our strategy. The first part that I did was to ask, what do you like about your company? What do you not like about the company? I mean, I was the outsider, the closest thing to an outsider at that point. The second thing is, what do you like about your market? What do you not like about the market? And the third thing is, what do you like and dislike about your position in the value chain? Because over there in telecom, we were very much at the bottom of the value chain. I mean, none of the customers, did you know that 85% of the calls that you're placing would go at some point or another through an interface line card? You didn't know that. You didn't care.
No, I was going to say, I don't want to know that.
Do you know that your PC has Intel inside?
I do.
Interesting, even though you're not the Intel's direct customer.
Right.
But there are things that you do know, there are things that you don't. So we kind of went through what is it that we like, what is it that we don't like. And out of that workshop, strategy development workshop, came the definition of a market. And the next step for me was to find out what that next market was.
So you were still acting as an entrepreneur there in that company.
Definitely.
And you, in fact, you were hired to be that.
I was hired to be exactly that, yes.
Interesting. Well, that's pretty cool. So we only have about 30 seconds left, but how long did you stay with Interface?
I stayed with Interface until 2015. That's when I started feeling the urge to do something else.
Got the itch again. So you were only there for what, 5 years, was it?
08 to 15, 7 years.
Okay, 7 years. All right, so that's pretty.
My magic number is 7 years. 7 years with, what was it, Electronics Line back in Israel, 7 years with Texas Instruments, 7 years with Interface.
That sounds very familiar. I was actually 4 with my first company, 7 with the next, 8.5 with the next, And now I've been with my own company for 14, so it's
Yeah.
divisible by 7 anyway. All right, we're going to take another quick break. We will be right back. Hi, this is Bob Gibbons with Riata Commercial Realty. If your office lease is going to be expiring in the next year or two, the one thing I would tell you definitely do not want to do is exercise a renewal option. Now, that may sound a little nuts. When you negotiate for that renewal option, why wouldn't you actually want to use it? Well, the reason is because while you want to have one as a reservation for your space so the landlord can't lease the space out from under you, that option may not actually work the way you want it to now. It may have made sense 5 years ago, but it doesn't today. The only thing that changes when you exercise a renewal option are the expiration date and the rent. But you may want to do other things like have another option to renew, have an option to terminate or expand. You may want to be able to expand now or have a new base year for your operating expenses. There's all kinds of things that need to be considered. So we recommend that you renegotiate, not renew. For more information, contact me, Bob Gibbons, at texastenantrep.com. That's texastenantrep.com. Okay, so you have been with Interface for 7 years. You're starting to get an itch for something else. What do you do?
Well, so it was interesting because when I joined Interface in 2008 was the time that I started working on my PhD dissertation. The VP of HR, my colleague at Interface, she was very excited that somebody comes in with a framework on how you build innovation. And Interface for me was a great test bed for everything that I just learned and development of all kinds of tools. So we did quite a few workshops and strategic planning and did a lot of ideation processes. And I started analyzing a lot in the innovation, the level of creativity of employees in the company and what can we do to change it. Company at the time had several facilities. The biggest one was here in Plano. The second one was actually in Paris, France.
Oh, okay. I thought you were
And
going to
so-
say Paris, Texas.
No, the
Let me stop you for just a minute. You said you were getting a PhD. Why?
why not?
Because it's a hell of a lot of work and a lot of money.
As it turns out, yes, you're right, it is. So it's interesting because my educational career has, or my educational path has its own story because I started as an engineer working in electronics engineering and computer science engineering. That's what I did. I was an R&D person. I was the head of R&D. I worked in R&D until even in my own startup back in Israel. But at some point, I got, we have something that's kind of equivalent to, I would call it an LSAT that we have here. So this was back in Israel, and I got my LSAT result was 709, and 709 is very high. And so, took 5 years and I didn't do anything with it. After 5 years, it expired, and I got this notice that said, your LSAT, the equivalent of LSAT, has expired. Do you want to take it again? So I figured, okay, I'll just take it again. Not planning on going to college, but I'll take it again. So I took it again, didn't study for it, got 735. So we're getting even higher. Now I'm starting to get letters from universities. And at that time, I had already been with my wife, and she asked, would you want to go back to college? And she was thinking probably engineering, go get another engineering degree. And I said, you know what, I would go back to college, but what I would be interested in more than engineering is law. And so I applied to only one law school in Israel, Tel Aviv University, which has the best law school in Israel. At least had it then. I don't know which one is the best today. And I got accepted. So now I'm working on my law degree in parallel to working in a company, then leaving that company, starting my own startup, still doing my law degree. That was hard. That was really hard.
Yeah. I got my MBA at night while working full time, and it's a pain. So
Yeah.
I feel for you. But
I enjoyed it.
did you ever practice law?
Never practiced
did.
law, never planned on practice law. But I think that law gives you a very good overview of life, everything, whether it's business interactions, interactions with government, criminal interactions, interactions between people, civil interactions. It gives you such a great perspective on life, I think. And that's one of the things I got out of it. The other is the concept of precedence, because precedences work in business as well.
Yeah.
And so if you think they're not binding, but if you think about, let's see how this worked out in a different situation and see if it's going to work in this one as well. Just the ability, the discipline of precedents or deploying precedents really helps you in business, in my opinion. And then moved to the U.S. I really enjoy, I think I told you last time that to me it's a three-legged stool. You always learn, you always teach, and you always practice. And so the always learn was important to me, so I got that law degree, moved to the U.S. Right after actually selling Voyager to PCTEL, started on my MBA, doing my MBA at night as well. Did that. In 2004, I decided I want to go for a PhD because I was really interested in organizational development and so on. So I signed up. At that time, in 2004, I was still the general manager of that business unit here in TI. And so I remember one morning I woke up at 4 a.m., cold sweat, thinking, I have two little girls. I have a general manager's position that's very demanding. And what's wrong with you? I mean, where do you have time to do a PhD? And so by 7 a.m., I already signed all the forms to get out of the program. So I got out of the program. 2007, when I was the strategist for the business unit at TI, I thought, you know what? Now I think I do have the time. So I re-registered, reapplied, got admitted, and this time completed the PhD. And, you know, I'll tell you, as my mentor really, really encouraged me, just do something that you're going to be used for the rest of your life. That's exactly what I did. That study that really answered one question: why are people so much more creative in startups than they are in mature company? Changed the rest of my life.
And what's the answer?
In 2 words, innovation culture. And how do you get innovation culture? 1 word: trust. And that's what in 2015 it sparked something in me that caused me to leave and start something new.
So obviously it had to do with your PhD, you said,
Yes.
and it obviously has to do with innovation and culture. So innovationcultureinstitute.com is your website. So clearly you decided to do that.
Actually, it's funny because the original name was large-scale creativity. It was, how do you find creativity in large-scale organizations? Large-scale creativity. And, you know, this was 6 months before I left Interface that I started, that I launched it. You can still see that in the top of my page over there, the logo that says large-scale creativity. And
well, and your books are Unkill Creativity, How Corporate America Can Out-Innovate Startups, Bowling with a Crystal Ball, From Startup to Maturity, Culture Starts with You, Not Your Boss. You mentioned that one earlier. Right. So, yeah, they're all in that vein. And I imagine
almost all.
A lot of your articles with Inc. magazine were probably with that
as
well.
I was writing at Inc. magazine in the what's called the Innovate channel, and my column was called Non-Accidental Ideas.
I like that. Non-accidental ideas. How'd you come up with that name?
Well, it goes back to that day at Interface when one of the board of directors, one of the directors on the board came to my office and he said, you know, this idea comes once in a lifetime. And I asked him why, and he said, because great ideas are accidental. And that's when I thought, you know, if you say, first of all, why do I have an unfair share of great ideas, what I would call great ideas? And I realized that if you want to take this analogy of an accident, let's say that you get on your bike and you ride your bike on the bike trails in the park, you want to have an accident. You're not going to have an accident because there are no cars driving on the bike trails in the park. If you're serious about having an accident while riding your bike, get on the Dallas Tollway at 8 a.m. with your bike. You're guaranteed to have an accident in the first 5 minutes. So back from the analogy, I do believe that the generation of an idea, what's called combinational creativity, and I researched the psychology and neuroscience of that is accidental. That moment where 2 old ideas merge in your head and create a new one, that is accidental. However, you can put yourself in circumstances that increase the probability of that happening. And that, by the way, led to one of my keynotes that I gave many, many times in the last several years, why you get your best ideas in the shower.
Because you have no distractions.
Well, it's more than that. As a result of that, I developed a 4-step process to how you increase the quantity and quality of your ideas. So, I'm sure that we'll talk about what we do in the Innovation Culture Institute, but there are 3 levels in the organization that you want to work on, and those are the individual, the team, and leadership. In the individual part, that is how I help you, Bob, or you, the listener, how do I help you become more creative individually, regardless of where you work? And it's a 4-step process, essentially, that I've put together that eventually would give you higher quality and quantity of ideas.
So what are the 4 steps?
The first one is get old ideas, collect old ideas. We tend to limit what we read, what we watch, what we learn to only the area that we're working on right now. But you know what? I can't count how many times in life, in my professional life, I had an idea that really came out of something else, a completely different area, because I always keep an open mind and I collect old ideas. The second step is just let them incubate. Do nothing. Just those old ideas need to incubate in your head until they merge. The 4th step is take a shower or drive, to the same place day in, day out, where you're kind of driving on autopilot, because that's when the executive functionality of your medial prefrontal cortex are down, and that's where your medial prefrontal cortex connects all ideas.
I think it was Hewlett-Packard had a great commercial that goes to exactly what you're talking about a long time ago called What If? And that it would show somebody swimming laps, and then all of a sudden she'd stop and be like, wait a minute, what if we, and that was the moment when those 2 things came together.
That's right.
That synapse fired.
And by the way, at this point, you would probably ask me, you just described steps 1, 2, and 4. What happened to 3?
I was going to get there.
Yes.
I was thinking you can't be that bad of a counter.
Yes, that's, or I count binary, 1, 2, 4, 8. But no, number 3 is engage in high intensity activity. And for me, back in the late 90s, early 2000, it was flying. I used to fly as a pilot in airplanes. And one day I showed up at the office one morning, and my boss asked me, the CEO, this is in Voyager, he asked me, did you go flying yesterday? And I said, yeah. How do you know? He said, I noticed that every time you come here after flying, you're so much more focused and creative and productive than any other time. So what I found was that if you engage in a high-intensity activity, right after that, you engage in a very low-intensity activity that really does not exercise your medial prefrontal cortex, or at least the executive functionality. That drop in intensity increases the quality and quantity of ideas you get.
Fascinating. All right, we're going to take one more break. Be right back. Okay, we're back talking to Yoram Solomon, and you can find more information about him at innovationcultureinstitute.com. So, Yoram, tell us about the Institute and what is the primary focus and objective of the Institute?
So, essentially, it's one of the things that I strongly believe. This is probably my biggest belief in the professional life, is that every company has the potential to be the most innovative company in the world. Every organization has the potential of being the most innovative in the world.
Within their little lane, you mean, or generally?
Within what they decide to do, and they can change direction, they can stay within the same direction, but they have the potential of being the most innovative organization or company in the world. And the question is, how do you get it out of them? And so my PhD study had already showed me that in order to be innovative, you need to have a culture of innovation. What I later found out was that in order to have a culture of innovation, you need to have trust. And trust is really the foundational building block for building a culture of innovation. Culture of innovation really falls into, I already mentioned there are 3 levels. I'll leave the individual level aside because that's really individual development. Within the company, you have a team, that's a horizontal relationship, and you have leadership, that's a vertical relationship. I'll make it very, very simple. In the vertical relationship, what you need is supervisors, leaders need to provide their employees with autonomy. You just need to give them autonomy. Now, I can spend the next 7 hours talking about what does autonomy mean, but part of it is, for example, giving them the big picture. Part of it is letting them know what impact they have on the overall company performance. So this is autonomy. Professor Teresa Amabile from Harvard, she had the best definition for autonomy. It's letting your employees not choose which mountain to climb. You need to choose that. This is part of the company, that choice. Not letting them choose which mountain to climb, but letting them choose how to climb that mountain. So this is autonomy. What's the flip side of it? Bureaucracy. The more bureaucracy you put, the harder it is. The harder it is for employees to be creative. In response to autonomy, and this is kind of the reciprocal vicious cycle, if you will, that I call, this is the blue one that's in my logo. This is the trust circle. The reciprocal element is accountability. It's willingness to take risk. And employees will not be accountable, will not be willing to take risk if their boss does not give them autonomy. And vice versa. As a boss, as a supervisor, you would not want to give autonomy if you don't feel that there is accountability on the other side. Now, on the flip side, we have bureaucracy, and if you put bureaucracy, what do you get? You get CYA from your employees. They do everything they can just to say, I did what you told me to. I'm sorry about what happened, but I did what you told me to. And you can see that day in and day out in different organizations when somebody serves you and they just do what they were told, nothing beyond that. So this is in the vertical, in the leadership dimension. Now you have the horizontal dimension, and that's teamwork. And in order for us to have creative and productive teamwork, you and I must hold what I would call constructive disagreement. We need to be able to disagree. We need to be able to raise our voices. We need to be able to yell and get really, really frustrated. And when it's time, we go grab a beer or grab lunch or whatever. Just for the record, when I was in high school, I did not drink beer and I was not invited to parties. Just putting it out there. But, and you thought your show is not going to be political. But it's our ability to not let this become emotional and personal. It stays a professional disagreement. And in order for that to happen, you must be vulnerable with me. You must be willing to ask stupid questions, to suggest stupid ideas. I must be willing to give you direct feedback and not worry about how you're going to react and whether you're going to take it personally and become emotional and irrational. And you must be receptive to that kind of feedback and not think that I'm doing that to hurt you. So listen to what I'm telling you. We both have to do all three, obviously. It's not just 1-2-1. For all of those to happen, for you as a boss to be willing to give me autonomy, for me to be accountable and be willing to take risks, not worried about what you're going to do. As a team, for you to be willing to be vulnerable with me, for me to be willing to give you feedback, and for you to be receptive, all of them require one thing, and that's trust.
And that's the biggest problem, is that most employers don't trust their employees and vice versa. You know, the employees don't feel like they have the freedom to really say what they think without risking getting fired or not getting a promotion or whatever, not getting a raise. And so, yeah, I mean, that tension is always there out of fear. And so fear is the opposite of trust in this situation, I would think, because if I have that trust, I'm not really fearful because I trust you and I know that I can tell you that. But so how does a company actually create that?
So great question. And by the way, one of the most important parts is, so why do I in 2015 decide that this is what I want to do? Not too often in life you get a point where you feel that you've been called to do something. It happened to me twice, I think. One is when I felt that I was called to run for the school board in Plano and did that for almost 4 years now. And the second was in 2015 when I felt that I know so much and I'm so passionate about it that maybe I'm called to go and help companies build a culture of innovation and trust. And so now the question is, how do you build trust? And I've conducted a lot of studies since my PhD study back 10 years ago, 2008 through 2010. Studies I have at this moment in time, I have 3 studies that are still open that I'm still collecting feedback for. But those helped me actually build a formula. I actually have a mathematical formula that I developed on how trust gets built, not only in organizations. And that's the cool thing about it.
Wow.
It's between you and me. It's between us and Danny. It's between me and my daughters and me and my wife. Every interaction, every relationship that you have, this is how trust gets built. Now, the importance of having this kind of formula is once you know how trust gets built, it's easier for you to know why it doesn't. For some reason, you and I are not capable of building this trust. What's happening? Well, if we break down this formula, which, by the way, has 6 variables, and they're very simple variables, we can see why it's not working and either do something about it or at some point know that it's just not going to work. It's just not going to happen.
So what are some of those variables include?
So first of all, there are 2 groups on the left. I put them. Those are the contextual variables, and those are competence. You need to believe that I'm competent. It is shared values. We need to have to share the same values. And some values are universal, like telling the truth. Others, maybe your personality type, our personality types, maybe they're just not compatible.
Yeah, I mean, I hate you.
Yeah, there you go. And the third is, unfortunately today, political affiliations can get in the way. I can tell you that there was somebody working for me that when she realized what side of the political map I was mostly affiliated with, she just said she couldn't work with me, period. There was nothing else. The third element, and it's really how deep and how important it is for us. Because, Bob, I really don't care what your political affiliation is. Maybe you don't care what mine is, so that's not going to be in the way. For people that do care, this can be in the way of building trust. And the third element is the symmetry or the fairness in the relationship between us. If we have a very tough deadline and we have to get there on time, and you spend numerous hours, countless hours, you work on weekends, but I don't. I work 9 to 6 and then I leave. I don't want to hear from you. It's not a very symmetrical relationship. Trust cannot be built. This is one side of it. These are the contextual elements. But then come the interactional or transactional elements. Every time we meet, every time you meet with someone, you build or kill trust based on 3 things: the amount of time you spend together, the intensity of that interaction. And by intensity, I mean, is it an email? Do we interact over email or text, or do we have a face-to-face meeting on the other extreme? And there are actually other things you can do. And the third element, the last element, is the positivity. How positive do you see me behaving in that meeting? So it's the sum of all interactions and the 3 contextual elements.
I love that. I love the whole idea of the positivity and the intensity, because now that kind of makes me want to ask, all right, if I'm trying to build trust with a customer, let's say, or an employee, but let's just say a customer in this case. So I'm now in the sales mode. The way I interact with my customer has to be something more than email. I mean, since when did email really create trust in anybody? I mean, now it can be based on the content inside to some extent, but not if it's cold.
Well, actually, interesting question about email. Next time that you invite me, we'll talk about an email that I received that came from the White House, or at least supposedly from the White House, that said, "Dear friend, you're invited to a meeting at the White House." We can talk about that at a later time. But for now, it's a great question, especially when you put it in sales, because one of the studies that I did was I asked people, think about yourself, and you want a home renovation project. It's a $10,000 project. You narrow down to 2 companies. You brought them in. I'm not going to go through too much detail, but one of them came across as very, very trustworthy. The other is very, very not trustworthy. They both ask for the same amount, $10,000. Who are you going to go with?
Mm-hmm. The one I trust.
The one you
The one I
trust.
believe.
I don't know why people think that it's a trick question. Actually, it's not a trick question. The one you trust. What happens if the one you trust is asking for 10% higher price? Would you still go with the one you trust?
Probably, depending on what the difference is in those two.
Well, so I'll make it short. 10% higher, 11,000 versus 10,000, 100% of my participants would still go with the trustworthy one. 20% higher, 12,000 versus 10,000, just about 50%. At 50% higher price, more than 20%.
Wow.
I narrow it down. I created a formula that gave me this one sentence. A trustworthy salesperson can sell the same product or service for 29.1% higher price.
Amazing. We're going to have to leave it at that. Thank you so much. Listeners, please go to Innovation Culture Institute. Find us on YouTube and on podcast at The Next Level Show. We'll be back next week with another great guest.